What do you do when you have wet wood? Well, you can let it dry or you can turn it wet. In this case, I like turning wet. And it's yellow birch. Yellow birch has the advantage of being able to be turned very, very thin and resist cracking quite well. So I'm going to turn this as a banana bowl, which is a great option for wet wood because even if it does go out of round, it's practically impossible to tell. So stay tuned and see what was done with this piece of wood. So the first thing I did was I mounted this piece of wood between centers. And that's, you can see there, it occasionally will stop spinning. When you're between centers, you're using a drive spur in this case, so it doesn't have the most secure hold, and that's why sometimes you see it slowing down or possibly stopping. The other thing that I want to do with this bowl is I want to be able to save the bark. So in order to do that, I want to make sure that I'm working mostly from the top down, so I'm pushing on the bark as opposed to coming from the bottom up, which would be pushing the bark off. So here I'm starting a starting cut with my skew, and that's just going to give me a position so that I can switch to my bowl gouge, which is much better at cutting. But I've already made that mark on that very top edge, and hopefully again we'll be able to preserve that bark. Now I believe at this point that I already have it mounted in my chuck. It's no longer between live centers, so it's much more secure, and I can put some pressure on it and do some deeper cuts without it slipping. And as I get it round, then I'm increasing the speed. I actually turned this quite fast, well over 1,000 RPMs, but I had to do it gradually. As in the beginning, I was turning only at about 500 RPMs, but again, as it got round, I was able to increase the speed more and more each time. So here I am just shaping the outside of the bowl. You can see here it's starting to take shape, and you can see the saddle shape that we're going to end up with at the end of this project. It is wet, so it's cutting well, although as you're going to see later on, I do have some punkiness that I have to deal with here because this wood, besides being wet, did have some punkiness on the outside of it, which is really just a start of rot. So that is something that I'm going to have to deal with. And you can see it there where I'm tapping with my fingers. Those two areas are very punky, and again, they will have to be dealt with. And I ended up dealing with this in two ways. One is I have some Minwax wood hardener here, and I put that on those two areas that I showed that are quite punky, and that will do a really good job at stiffening up the fibers, which will allow me to get a better cut on them. You do have to be careful with this material. It is quite fumy. So just make sure that you're wearing some sort of protection. Now I've moved to the inside because the wood hardener hasn't dried up yet, so rather than work on the outside, I'll move to the inside. I did the same thing. I used my skew to make a starting point so that I know where I can use my bowl gouge, and it also gives me a bit of a lip and does a good job again at helping preserve that bark. And then once I do that, then I switch to my bowl gouge and start hollowing out the inside of the bowl. Again, I'm turning very fast, again over 1,000 RPMs at this point, and it's cutting very, very well. I'm able to remove a lot of material very, very quickly. I still have my tailstock engaged. I still have a fair bit of weight here. So until I remove some more weight, I don't want to trust the tenon on the bottom of this bowl, because especially on wet wood, it is easy to break it off. So I really want to remove as much material as I can while I still have my tailstock engaged. Now that that wood hardener has had a chance to harden up, I'm going to go back over the outside of the bowl with a very sharp bowl gouge and just try and clean up the tear out that I'm getting in that area where I have that punky wood. Unfortunately, even with the wood hardener, I'm still getting a bit of tear out in that area, so I will have to deal with that differently. So one of the things that I will do is I'll start sanding the outside, and sanding does a better job when you have tear out than sometimes when, if you can't remove it even with a sharp tool, sanding will help. So I'm just using my mini grinder with an 80 grit disc, which is very aggressive. It's more aggressive on the angle grinder than it is on a normal sanding disc. And I'm just going and working that outside to try and get rid of as much of that tear out in that soft area as I can. And that sanding disc did a fairly good job. Now I'll go back to working that inside. But unfortunately, I've gone about as far as I can with my tailstock engaged. I really couldn't get down the wall any further without bumping into my tailstock. So now I'll just slowly whittle away at that icicle in the middle of the bowl. And you do have to be careful here. It's easy to get a catch at this point, and you can break the tenon fairly easily once you disengage. And if you get low on that icicle that you see in the middle there, that will cause a catch and it will break your tenon off. I know this because I've done it before. But I just slowly whittle away, and I say slowly, it's cutting very quickly. It's not slow at all, but I just take light cuts there in the center and remove as much of that as I can. Now, one good thing about a banana bowl is it's easy to see the thickness all the way through. You can see it here, and you can see it here. It's pretty uniform. I'm pleased with that. I'm going to take a little bit off there, and then from there on down it gets thick. So that corner needs to really, right here, come down. So I'll work on that, but the top is good. I'm not going to go any further on that. It's ready to sand some more. I may put some coating on it overnight, let it dry, because it's wet. I notice as I get thin here and I'm spinning it, moisture's coming to the surface. So it's pretty wet, which is going to make it hard to get a good sanding. But let's go ahead and work a little more on the thickness. Here I'm just working the very bottom of the bowl, which is actually below the rim that you could see earlier. It's pretty uniform, but down at that bottom corner where I transition from the side to the bottom, it's still a little thick. So I want to get as much of that removed as possible. Keeping track, I've been an hour getting to this point, and it's getting ready to sand. The outside's ready to sand. I've got a bit of tear out, and it's not so much tear out as it is bunky, so I may just mix a little glue and sawdust in there to fill those holes, and I've got some more there. I'll sharpen up and see if I can remove them, but it may be a fill job. So this is the area that I've been talking about all along. And at the end of the day, with the wood hardener, with a sharp tool, I was not able to remove it. So all I do is take some CA glue, rub some sawdust in it, and then hit it with some accelerator, and do that a couple times. And that'll fill all those very fine holes where I have the tear out. And because I'm filling it with the sawdust, it is almost impossible to see where the repair has been done. All right, I'm finished turning. It's sanding now, and this is the reason why. That's 5 millimeters, and it's flexing. So as it's spinning, it's flexing in and out. So it's going to be pretty near impossible to get a smooth surface off the tool just because of that movement there. So I'm going to sand it. It is going to be by hand, but when I say by hand, I just mean with the tool, but without the lathe spinning. And at this point, I'm not shaping, I'm just removing some tool marks. It is wet. As I'm spinning it, I mentioned water's coming out, so it is wet. I don't mind because it will go out around, but again, this shape of a bowl, you can't tell if it goes out around anyways. If you look at that, you'd swear it wasn't round because it looks way bigger in this direction than in this. But that's just the way the bowl works. So if it goes a bit out around, that's never noticeable. I've got a little bit of tear out here. I'll fill that the same as I did on the outside with glue and sawdust. But yeah, this bowl is pretty well in the books. I may let it dry overnight and then finish sanding it up tomorrow morning. Put lots of CA glue in here. And then get some fine sawdust, and there's no shortage of sawdust here. And rub that in. And that'll fill those holes very well. And you'd never know they were there. It's tear out, and I don't think I could get rid of it any other way at this point. I couldn't get it down thin enough to remove them because I'm already thin enough, so I can't take the surface down everywhere else. So in this case, I will have to fill them. And it's not tear out per se, that was probably bunkiness in the wood. That's all that is. There. That's ready. I think I'll let that dry overnight and then I'll hit it in the morning. The other thing I'm going to do is just go around the outside of this bowl and put some CA glue on the bark, because I do want to keep this in place at this point. So this will be a live edge as opposed to a natural edge. I know I mentioned this on my channel before. Live edge means bark's on it. Natural edge means the natural edge, but the bark has been removed. Usually I remove the bark, but in this case it's staying on well, and I will probably put a wipe-on poly, which can go right over top of the bark, and that'll keep the bark from flaking off in the future. If it's food grade, you don't necessarily want bark coming off and getting into that. So the CA glue will just get soaked up by that bark. This here's part of the bark you see there is quite spongy, so that'll just soak that glue right up, but that will stiffen it up as well. All right, we've been around. That's good for tonight. Just a little over an hour to get to the bowl to this spot. And here's the final product. Very pleased with the way it turned out. Quite thin, less than 5 millimeters. And I was able to keep the bark all the way around. Not only the bark, but you see how this is not just bark. You've got that spongy layer, which really adds to the look of the bowl. So I was quite pleased with the way that turned out. Even the soft area that we were dealing with turned out fairly well. Pleased overall with the way the bowl turned out. Leave a comment, let me know what you think, and thank you for watching.